Hi, we are going to talk about group and working with groups um, and the nature of groups and the idea of the person being a system nested within bigger and bigger systems. And I have Cassell Gross with me this morning. And she was so enthusiastic when I presented for the Focusing Institute TIFI on group. And so we're going to have a recorded conversation just about our common interest in working with groups. So good morning.
Good morning.
I think I've hardly ever had anybody quite as enthusiastic about a presentation as you were.
Really? I'm
Well,
amazed. I was just so, yeah. Oh, I was just excited, totally wildly excited, because I find the topic of groups fascinating. But I'm also so in love with Jenlin's writings and with the whole way of thinking and being that he sort of keeps inviting people into. And so to have both together, I was just like, oh, wow.
yes. Well, maybe you had said to me that you had a whole agenda for our conversation this morning, so I'd love to hear that.
Well, I don't have so much of an agenda for the conversation as I have an agenda for what I would love to see happen, but maybe I should save it, or maybe I'll just tell it right in the beginning.
Sure, go ahead.
My dream would be to have a study group. I see you do lots of study groups, and I think it's just such a wonderful way of doing things, to look at group dynamics through what we know about the process model and focusing.
Yes, wonderful. Absolutely.
So that the more, because since we talked, I started going back and digging out some of my favorite books about groups and thinking about how important I feel that it is, and how a neglected subject I feel that it is.
Absolutely, yes.
And
what is it that captures you so much about groups?
what is it that captures me?
Yeah. It captures your imagination, and you're passionate about it. You light up when you
Well, I tell you, I think it might be many forces at once, but of course. But I think that when I took some courses on groups and on group dynamics, I did a 1-year training. We met 5 days 4 times, and and all day every day in those 5 days, and we really dug into a group about groups, looking at how groups work and looking at ourselves in groups. And I just saw so much. I just saw that, so much more than I had ever seen about forces that influenced me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute, if we don't see these, then we are so, well, we're subject to them. But also there's something about just a dimension of our seeing that we don't have.
Absolutely, yes.
And I wanted everybody to be able to see it. I'm like, wow. But I did find that not everybody was as enthusiastic as I was.
What did you, if you don't mind my asking, What did you discover about yourself in groups?
A lot of
I
things.
know that's a big, big subject, but I just thought that people might want an example.
Well, let me give you an example then of what I felt like was the most potent learning in the group, because it was very visceral and real for me. So this was a group that met over time. And so it was either the second or the third of the 4 big chunks where we met. And there were 16 people in the group. They were all therapists. All the trainers were the trainers, and all the participants were. The participants were all Hakomi teachers. And the trainers were also Hakomi teachers, but who had studied at the National Training Laboratory. So they really had spent time understanding the dynamics of groups, and they were really good leaders. And so I came into this time late, and the groups, we were supposed to form 2 subgroups that were our process groups, that we did whole group activities, and we'd go off in these little groups and we would process. And so when I got there, this was I think it was the first time we'd chosen groups, the time before the leaders had chosen the groups, because we didn't know each other very well. And so when I got there, it just seemed like to me, everybody was like, they were like children on a playground. You go here, you do this, you do that. So I felt kind of snooty about it, like, doesn't matter. I mean, I wasn't in the energy at all. And so I ended up in one of the groups, sort of, I don't even know, it wasn't traumatic. I just ended up there. I wasn't in the carrying that much energy. So a couple of days went past, and I started noticing this phenomena in the small group that I was in, which is that I had no voice. That no matter what I said, it was just like I spoke into space and created space, and then someone else would speak, and I would go, wait a minute, I just said something. I mean, it was almost like I was invisible.
Yeah.
And I remember even walking outside with one of the people in the group, and then they talked right over me. And I'm like, oh, this is so weird. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And the group leaders, especially this one guy named David Patterson, he was just such a good leader. He was very quiet, didn't say a lot. And I remember, because he met me at, like, I was at getting some coffee, and he just sort of came by and he said, the roles in groups don't change much, but the people who fill them do. And I thought, I think that's a hint. I didn't know what it was. And so I'm thinking, because it was so visceral, being out. I was so out of that group, but nobody was doing anything to me. And then we had another sort of fishbowl group, and the Amina, the other leader, she said something about the women in the village who got together at the well but couldn't get back to their village, or some other metaphor that didn't make sense, but I knew she was trying to help me get it. And so then I went home. I didn't live in Boulder at the time, and I was staying at a friend's house, and she's a good listener, and so I just poured over the whole thing over and over again with her. And she's worked a lot with elders, and she'd done a lot of things with human beings, a very human person. And I finally got that I was in some configuration of the group where I really wasn't, I didn't exist completely. And I
Mm.
couldn't think. When I would try to think, I couldn't really think very well. And it was so creepy. So the next morning I went in and I said, okay, really loud. So I got people's attention. I said, I am getting ready. I'm in a role in this group and I'm getting ready to abdicate that role.
I love it.
But before I do, I want to hear from every one of you what you've gotten out of having me in it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, this was also one of the smartest things I ever did, but we'll leave that. So people kind of looked at me like, huh? Because they weren't aware. Nobody
Of
was doing it
course.
purposefully.
Yes. Yes.
People said things, when they really reflected, and our purpose was to learn what we were doing. So that gave us a lot of, thing of freedom and opportunity. People said things like, it just felt good to have somebody out. I felt more in.
Ah, it does feel good to have somebody out. Wow.
And people said, well, you didn't look very distressed. So we didn't really, worry about you. I mean, I wasn't like, so
Mm.
nobody tried to help me, but there was just this subtle. And then one guy said, well, you kind of reminded me of my mother. So I was really glad you couldn't say anything.
Oh. Oh.
And so then I just, I was back. I
Mm.
had broken the spell.
Yes, yes, yes.
So
Wow. I love that idea that there was a kind of a spell
yeah,
and
but
that broke it.
it isn't over. So in the afternoon, we had another kind of fishbowl thing. And this guy, actually it was the guy who had said something about his mother. But he'd been very much a leader in the group. I don't mean a formal leader, but taking leadership, and his, voice was very valued in that, particular configuration, da, da, da. So we're doing this fishbowl and I'm looking at him and all of a sudden he said, I'm just having the hardest time staying present. Something is happening. And I thought, oh my God. I abdicated that space and it's trying to get somebody else.
Oh.
I don't know if I believe that, but it's sort of what it looked like. Yes. I'm like, whoa. Groups there's something more than we know.
Yes, something more than we know. Yes, yes. Before you were talking about group mind, and you were saying, well, you don't know if the group has a mind, but that there's something that phrase captures. And I was thinking that Gene Genlin was horrified by the idea of what he called group think, that the group has to be all on the same page, and that there's incredible destructiveness possible there of sort of implicit or unconscious even pressure to agree and to think a certain way and to drink the Kool-Aid. Is that metaphor? I wonder if that metaphor of drinking the Kool-Aid is.
I don't see group thinking and the way I use group mind as being.
No. I was going to say that
Yeah.
the group think is a kind
Bay
of
of pigs.
conscious pressure to think the same way.
Well, there's a lot of research. I mean, a lot of writing about that vis-a-vis the Bay of Pigs, because all of these people sat around, all of these incredibly brilliant, independent thinker kind of people. And this is later in reflection, they all recognize the places that they should have spoken up and something happened to them and they did not.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's a a wildly extreme example where we nearly blew up the world. But
Yes, 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 yes.
it happens. I see it all the time. I mean, I see it in every group I'm in.
Absolutely. Yes. I think I might have mentioned to you that a group that I had that met here at my loft was several of the people were saying it's so good to be with like-minded people, and that had so struck me. Like, what if we're not like-minded, and there's this sigh of relaxation that we're with like-minded people, and then we want everybody to have minds that work like ours, and pressure subliminally pressure people to think the way we do. But the way you're using the word group mind, I understand, is a very different way. It's like that the group, and this is all kinds of groups, from the big groups to the very small groups to the families, to has an organismic coherence, and it has a life of its own, and that we don't understand that life of its own,
Right.
that we make it, but it also makes us, and we are the interaction with the I, is an interaction with the we.
Well, yeah, that the work of Bion, Wilfred Bion.
Yeah.
And so I was a quote from Bion is to understand, I mean, maybe for people who don't know, he was a psychoanalyst who was in the army in World War II, and he studied groups and then wrote a lot about them. And he really was one of, at least as far as I know, one of the first people who really began to see a development of groups. That in the beginning there were, he had what he called assumptions, that the group made assumptions about what was important at any given stage, and that people tend to conform to those assumptions. I mean, he's brilliant. One could read about him, but he said, he looked at the paradoxical relationship between the individual in the group and the group in the individual.
Yes, I love that. Yes. Each are groups, right? We each have a coordinated, sometimes discoordinated assembly of aspects. I don't like the word parts, but I use it anyway.
Forces, maybe forces, and
voices
voices and forces.
Voices and forces. Yes.
So I was thinking about the the kind of broad am I interrupting too much?
No. Okay. I
Okay.
know that feeling, though, the feeling of this enthusiasm and and wanting to capture that moment. I was going to say, and you probably picked up that I was going to say something, and that's one of the very rudimentary skills of group, is when do you speak and how do you speak, and how do you honor that enthusiasm, and your own process, and also there's some kind of almost inherent taking turns thing in us, wanting to give room to the other person, and that's very complicated. But what I was going to say, I'm going to put right there, and I'll come back to it. What were you going to say?
Okay, you've got yours. You're not losing it, so I
No,
can.
I'm not. I'm not.
As I was thinking about groups, I thought, okay, what do we mean by groups? Because we have let's say we have the intrapsychic group.
Mhm.
Then
Right,
we have whatever shows up, which looks like one thing usually.
right.
And then we have dyads, and that brings all the intrapsychic groups of both into this one moment of the dyad. And I found it wonderful thinking about Eving, and that the Greeks thought that the dyad was sort of nature's first paradox, because there can be no dyad without two separate parts, but the two parts are changed by being in the dyad. They're no longer what they were.
Yes, 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 yes. Can
And
you
I know,
say can you say for other people a little bit about Eving?
I can say a little bit, but I'm not exactly know what I'm talking about, but I'll tell them. And if they,
It does about
so my understanding of Eving is that in any given sort of manifest instant, all the forces that are playing on that moment are influencing each other, that everything is changed by everything. It's like what I just described in the dyad, but like lots and lots of things. Like I'm changed by the temperature in the room, but the temperature in the room is changed by my being in the room. And I think groups are a perfect example, because if you, especially in a forming group, a group is totally different whether you're in it or not, but you don't know what that group is going to be until you're in it. But you're changed the minute you're in it.
Yes, that's beautiful. You don't know what it's going to be, but you could only know when you're in it, and you don't know it without you.
Right. Yeah. So that's what I'm understanding about Eving, and that it's it's just sort of the way things work, rather than hard and fast linear causality. That it's in part of the process that everything, that there's this dance, dance of complexity, that there's no one thread you can take apart and say this is it, because this it is connected to every other it. I mean, I love, Carl Sagan said, if you really want to make a pie from scratch, then you have to reinvent the universe.
If you really want to make a
Pie from
pie, yes, yes. What is that scratch?
yeah.
Yes, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
so,
Everything is always in motion, and we are that motion. We aren't entities or things that are changed. And so if you take this element out, then it's going to be without that element. Everything is this motion, this dance, including us. And it's very hard for us to get our mind around that.
yeah.
When we were thinking about having this dialogue this morning, we couldn't imagine who will we be and what will we say, and we could have it all planned out, and it wouldn't be the way we planned.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's freeing, it's very freeing, really. Because it takes away a lot of blame. It takes away a lot of trying to figure out one thing after another, because go beat your head against the wall, because it doesn't exist. So, so, but in my schema of thinking, okay, dyad, and then you come to the level of group, and that I think that because we're talking about groups, so I was thinking, okay, what is a group, and what do we really mean by group?
Yeah.
And actually, I think the only thing one can do is just define it every time, because it's such a huge concept. Some people even call a dyad a group. Other people would say, no, it's 3 people, and those 3 people have to be interacting or know that they're together. And other people would say, no, just 3 people standing on the street corner who don't even know each other. They're a group from the point of view of an observer. So one really has to just define it every time. What are we talking about? Are we talking about an intimate family group, or are we talking about the kids on the playground, or
What would you like it to mean? I love that move in TAE and Thinking at the Edge, where you say, what would you want that word to mean? Because words don't have meanings on their own. They have meanings. They're pointing to something that each of us wants to say. So what would you like the
so
word?
what I would like in terms of the discussion at hand is for to mean small group, and to mean a group of people from probably 3. I mean, I would call 2 a dyad, not a group. I mean, it is technically a group as well, but to people who can interact, who can know each other, and who can have dynamics between that. Each part of the group can connect to each one, so that it's kind of a matrix. And out of that, then I think, so I looked up community, and in my mind, community is a bigger thing. It's sort of there could be lots of small groups in a community.
Yes.
Technically, I think a community and a group, I think the words get a little mixed up, because you could have, but I think if one were going to write about it, one would need to be very clear about how one was talking about it, or if one wanted to ask someone else what their experience, that you have to define it, because the words are too slippery.
Well, for the sake of our conversation, I'm with you about making a distinction between dyads and groups and communities. When I've had groups all my adult life. Even as a child, I started a group on my block. Actually, I was an only child, and I was very lonely. So I've always wanted groups.
Were you did you grow up in New York? Where did you grow up?
In Brooklyn?
In Brooklyn.
Yes, yes,
I love it.
yes. So I began this current passion about groups with wanting to make a contribution to communities and to political issues and to social issues. When in 2016, when people were very dysregulated, and communities were, well, they are now also, maybe always, but it came to my attention that communities really needed help, and that focusing could make a big contribution, that the social movements that I've been involved with, like the women's movement and the gay liberation movement and the all of those liberation movements had been fractured by an inability to really deal with conflict within the group. And so I started by wanting to teach focusing to people who were making a contribution to community or wanting to. It occurred to me just recently that those same skills that I'm seeking in using focusing skills in community to talk to others in conversation across difference, and that's the way that I
Yeah.
myself, that's also very necessary in working with groups. And I think of groups as being, you know, classes, AA meetings, support groups, all kinds of groups that we have, and wanting to learn what a focusing oriented group would be like. And it would be something different, I think, than the original changes groups that Jean Genlin had back in the 70s. Although we can learn a lot from those groups. Those groups were not attuned to group dynamics. Genlin was mostly attuned to keeping the group dynamics from what he called groupthink. And so I think you and I are both fascinated with how we can use the philosophy and the skills of focusing to understand group interactions, which is really our way of living together. I mean, it's not a big, fancy, separate thing. It's our way of relating to each other.
Well, almost everything we do is in a group, you know.
Absolutely,
So,
yeah. And if we don't know something about who we become in different groups and how we become it, and how to bring our individual selves into a dyad, which was my passion in the 80s and 90s, how to be in a relationship and be yourself, but then how to be in a relationship with a group and be yourself.
Yeah.
What is it that we mean? It takes on a very, very different meaning when we say to be myself in a focusing orientation.
Yeah.
Maybe I could say just a word about that to be myself isn't a content, as Jean would say, particular, I'm more this, I'm more that. But to be myself is an experience of congruence, of what is that experience of being?
Well, yeah, I think that's such a wonderful question. I mean, things come to mind and I almost hesitate to answer because it's almost like, oh, let's just leave it out there for everybody to ask that question.
Yes. That's a good idea. That's a good idea, because we need to stop soon, and maybe we could just see what we haven't said and what we've said that we want to come back to.
Yeah. Well, there's so many more things I want to talk about with you.
And we will.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that question, even though I left it out there for a little while, if I can, just because something did arise inside of me when you said that, because, and I thought, well, what feels right within the context of what we're speaking of is that when I can be in a group and literally very, very much be in touch with myself, in touch with my life force, and that I contribute into the group from there and make it so that it's okay for others to do that, so that it isn't it feels like to me that that's a different myself than totally different myself than saying, well, I'm always blah blah. Or some other descriptor of a self that isn't currently present.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That feels good.
It does.
Inherently reinforcing. The other, the just descriptors, they don't feel very good. They're empty, and we kind of have to keep going on because we don't get nourished by our own blah blah.
I think when you say it feels good, it's a particular kind of good. And it's a good that feels connected and has a rightness about it. So you might even be saying something painful or something fearful, and it could have that good in it, like that's right.
Yeah.
And when we say feels, it isn't just an emotion, and it isn't just in us. I remember talking to Jean Genlin about how things are not just subjective when we have a feeling or it feels right, because it's not just in us, because we are an interaction. So it's an event that happens that changes everything. So when I have a feeling, it's not just in me, it's a feeling. I had a feeling about that, and it was in you, and it brought this, right? Nothing is just subjective and nothing is objective, because we can't be outside of it. As you were saying before, we can't know the group that we're not in. We can't know the universe that we're not in. We only know the universe as it is through us and with us and being impacted by us.
Yeah. I sometimes wish I could talk to Genlin about groups, because I've listened to his little clip, that 8-minute clip where he talks about how groups are bad and he doesn't want to have anything to do with them. And it feels like to me that I was thinking, Carl Rogers wrote a book about encounter groups, which I never read, but I'm having this feeling that that his calling, that Jane's calling, was to sort of save the individual from being, overrun and swamped by both the scientific thinking that let people out, or group think, groups that, just sort of absorb the individual.
Like the spell that was on you.
Yeah. And that in little bitty ways is on every time we get in a group, actually. But that we're at a different time, and that, what he says about, dialogue groups, and what he wants is a group that allows the individual to say more, to see more, to be more.
Yes.
And I almost would, I sometimes think I'd like him to say everything he said, just take that tone of, judgment out. Because it's right. It's like he was trying to get the individual out of the grasp of these other forces. But then for the individual to really be complete, they need to be able, we need to go back and see those other forces. And, you know, we are to, he did good work, you know, but now we can, like when he talks about the groups that he'd like to be in, well, they take a lot of work to get there. They don't just happen out of the blue.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. And so the work to get there is also a huge learning journey.
Absolutely. So um, he gave us something very important, and it was something also of the time. And we need to fill in what he didn't give us that is very important for our time, and to keep hold of his sensitivity that um, that came out of his time, and uh, stay loyal to it by allowing it to help us to expand, because you know his philosophy is that we are interaction. You can't save the individual from you can't save the individual from the group, just as you can't save the ego from the, I don't know what that metaphor would be. And I don't know that I like the word ego, but you get my meaning there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the process model, when I think about the little I've read, I mean, I'm in the middle of chapter 4 for the first reading. So, you know, that means that I'm in my beginning language class, so to speak, but I can say, hi, how are you in
Oh
process?
yeah, yes, and you say it very well. Um, I certainly see that process model thinking in you, and it's a pleasure. Well, I think we're going to need to stop here, but we will continue um, in a further time.
Okay, that's great. Well, I have a question. I was thinking, what if I sort of started thinking about putting together some kind of a study syllabus or something